This week on the Deep Leadership Podcast.
It's for me, it's all very practical, and there's some sort of nothing more practical than great theory. I often say the world's on fire and we need more firefighters. And it's not technical, it is character. We need strength of character.
This episode is brought to you by the Salty Sailor Coffee Company, the official coffee of the Deep Leadership Podcast. Salty Sailor is a veteran-owned coffee brand on a mission to deliver premium, fresh roasted coffee while making a positive impact in the world. Their motto is drink coffee and do good, which reflects their commitment to making amazing coffee and actively supporting the military community. 10% of every order goes to the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, an organization dedicated to helping sailors, Marines, and their families in times of need. All our listeners get 10% off every order of their amazing coffee by using the discount code DEEP at checkout. So check them out at saltysailorcoffee.com. Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Dr. Mary Crossan. Mary is a distinguished university professor of strategic leadership at Ivey Business School at Western University. In 2021, she was recognized on a global list representing the top 2% of the most cited scientists in her discipline. And in 2023, she received the Lifetime Career Achievement Academy of Management Distinguished Educator Award. Her research on leader character, organizational learning and strategic renewal, and improvisation is published in over 100 articles and books. Mary is the co-author of The Character Compass, which offers practical roadmap for implementing leader character in areas such as leadership development, strategy, purpose, culture building, trust, executive recruitment, HR practices, and risk management. And I'm excited to have her on the show to learn more about the importance of character in leadership. So Mary, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, John. Thank you.
It is an honor to have you on the show. And as I mentioned before we press record, we really haven't talked about character much in all 330 episodes. I'm not sure why character hasn't been a more prominent feature in the show. So I'm so excited to have an expert to talk to us about it. So maybe you can get us started and help us sort of understand the term. What is leader character?
Well, leader for us is about the disposition to lead. So we'll start with that part. It's not just about people who hold CEO or senior leadership positions, but all of us, every person. If you're a parent, you know that your kids these days in a 24/7 social media world are going to need the disposition to lead to bring their best selves to organizations and the work that they do. And you started off by saying we haven't talked a lot about character. It's one of the oldest areas of study. You go back to Aristotle, Plato, Confucius, and the interesting thing is somehow it fell off the plate. Like and if you even think about the purpose of higher education at one point in time was about developing character of the individual. And many organizations that you have a military background, you know how important character is, for example, in the military. So in some ways, we've talked about it. We think we know what it is. They do also a lot of work in the sports field. Everybody seems to have a view on it, but it's like describing the proverbial, parts of the elephant. It's all about grit, or it's all about integrity, or it's all about ethics and honesty. So a way that we would talk about it that brings a little bit more rigor to it is our study of character brings us to 11 interconnected dimensions with judgment in the middle. So picture for the listener on this, it's like there's a wheel with judgment in the middle, and it's surrounded by 10 other dimensions, and by the way, Aristotle would have called that judgment practical wisdom. So at the top of the wheel, picture these what we call expansive kind of character qualities, transcendence. That's that sort of future-oriented, optimistic nature of being. Drive, which a lot of people get, courage. So the transcendence is flanked by both of those. If we go to the bottom of the wheel, it's more the grounding kind of ways of understanding our being, like integrity. Again, people talk about integrity, but in our case, The behaviors of integrity are revealed through being authentic, candid, transparent, consistent, and principled. Flanking integrity are humility on one side and temperance. A lot of people don't, that's kind of an old word, but it's about being patient and calm and self-regulated. Then on the right-hand side of the wheel, we've got like the scales of justice, humanity and collaboration, and opposing that on the left side, justice and accountability. So those 11 dimensions of character really define a way of expressing and understanding for people, like the anatomy and physiology of the body. But a key facet of all of this is because these behaviors are interconnected, Aristotle reminded us that any virtue would operate like a vice in excess or deficiency. So put another way, I mean, people get, Aristotle talked about courage could operate as recklessness in its excess state. But what they don't really get is we don't want to dial down a high level of drive or courage. Those things are fantastic, but they need to be supported by the other dimensions of character in order to have them operate in that virtuous state as opposed to the vice state of deficiency or excess.
I absolutely love that. We've had guests on the show, and I've written in my own books about the idea that leadership is a balance. Like too much of one thing can end up being a problem, right? And so you're always sort of looking for that optimum balance. And so what I love is what you're saying is this wheel with sort of opposing sides of the wheel that are, too much of one is actually problematic, right? Too much of the other is also problematic, right? So you're looking to find those. And the way you express it, I like, is the idea that it's sort of a wheel that you can sort of see all of this in one place, right? So I love the idea of these interconnected dimensions. So, and what you're talking about is you're describing leadership, the characteristics of leadership, right? So we're not talking about the behaviors necessarily. It's more like a leadership's character, right?
Well, they are behaviors. So, but it's different than personality. So personality or semi-stable traits like extroversion or introversion. Character, the study of character comes from a different place. Peterson and Seligman, Martin Seligman, former president of the American Psychological Association, and Christopher Peterson did heavy lifting on character back in 2004. They wrote a book, Character, Strengths, and Virtues, about an 800-page research book. They had a set of criteria that established a behavior as virtuous in a universal context, like across religions, across time, etc. And those are the behaviors that we're looking at. And those behaviors, like empathy, an important behavior, but think about this as all of these behaviors have this virtuous quality to them, and yet can also operate in this excess or deficiency side. And I think that's the piece that has really tripped us up. Because think about how many organizations, for example, value integrity. And first of all, I say, well, that's like telling somebody to run a marathon and not train for it. Because to be candid, authentic, transparent, principled, consistent, those behaviors that encompass what it means to have integrity, they're hard to develop in and of themselves. And then we could operate in the excess state of that if we don't have the humility to support it. That gives people license to be, dogmatic and abrasive, so sure, they're candid. They'll tell you exactly what they think, but they're lacking humanity and humility. And so a lot of the toxic behavior that we do see in organizations, I think comes from this misunderstanding really of what character is and how it manifests itself.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So there are some behaviors that are associated with it, but it's the behaviors that are based on the character of the person. Yeah. Yeah. So you say that, more than ever, our collective fate sort of hinges on the character of those who, lead and influence organizations. So why do you think leader character is so critical for individuals and organizations especially in today's business environment?
Well, I wish I had learned this sooner in my life. So I'm about close to 40 years in the business school, focusing in the field of strategy, looking at strategic agility, organizational learning, trying to understand high performance in organizations. And it wasn't until 2008 that we tripped over character. So this is back to this blind spot. How did we miss this? Well, I missed it for a long period of time, as did others. So what happened was, with the economic crisis, we were looking at what are the failures of leadership. Here we were in a business school. Had we cultivated a quality of leadership that led to some of the, uh, judgment and decision making that really compromised and led to a lot of horrific and catastrophic situations? So we wrote this book at the time. It's available, by the way, through the Ivey website, called Leadership on Trial. And it was at that point in time when we held focus groups around the world, talking to leaders about what had gone wrong, that they were saying it was less about failures of competency, and actually it was more about failures of character. But we're back to this, point where everybody had a different view of what character was, and many people questioned whether you could even develop it. At the time, I had no idea. I mean, it's not an area that I had studied, but myself and my colleagues, the ask was so compelling, and the gap, that we really turned all of our attention to try to understand what this is and figure out how we would assess, develop, and embed it in organizations. So that was really the journey about, there's this missing piece that caused havoc in 2008. We've got a course correct around that. And we really began to think about it as, we need to be able to elevate character alongside competence in higher education and organization.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I think, one of the things that I see missing a lot of times, like I speak a lot to, MBA programs and graduate schools, and I see them spending a lot of time on sort of the competence side of things, the technical skills to be a leader or to be a manager, I should say. But it seems like they miss out on sort of like the people skills to be a leader. And so, and certainly there's a lot left out in terms of character development. So you say that we have to elevate character alongside competence in the organization. So what does that look like? Does it mean that we have curriculum for character that's sort of equivalent to the competence piece?
For sure. It means wherever competence resides, character belongs. And you will see in organizations, there's been a little bit of a, if you want to call it, infusion. Character started to get infused, like the competency languages, knowledge, skills, and abilities. And you can understand why knowledge. I mean, we've just been accumulating it, right? So there's a lot of attention in so many spaces about what's the knowledge we need, what are the skills we need, what are the abilities we need to do the job. Not unimportant. That stuff is like, for sure, we need to do that. There's a category called other under competencies, which is where some things started to come in. Some things like courage, for example, in some competency frameworks. But here's the problem. They're treating it like a competency and a skill, but that's not what it is. Character as a habit of behavior, connecting in with these other virtuous habits, means that the moment we put in courage and we didn't put in humility, as an example, we actually hardwired the very problems of overweighting some dimensions of character and underweighting others. So the advice that we give about this is, whether you're teaching medicine or law or engineering or business, or you're in an organization, keep your competencies as they are, whatever they are. But we liken it to a tree, where the leaves of the tree are your competencies. There's a root system that underpins all competencies that we developed. In my case, I develop a lot of the strategic competencies in people. And the failure of organizations is often not about their competencies and strategy. It's usually about the character that is underpinning, the judgment and decision making of those competencies. So what we're trying to do is get better foundation, better roots of the tree system of the individual, no matter what the competencies are that we're developing.
That makes a lot of sense. And like I was just thinking to myself, as you say, where they handpick or cherry pick a few character traits to teach, I can see it getting weighted to one side of the wheel, right? That's what we were saying earlier. We tend to focus on one side, and we've got to get that balance right. Um, but what's interesting about it is, again, so the question is, can we assess character? Can we develop character? Like we do like skills? Is it something like that, or is it innate in people, or can we develop it?
So that one of the biggest myths is that your character is developed by the time you're 5 or something like that, some early age. Think about it as a habit, and it's a virtuous habit. And because it's not trait based, it has this quality that we can exercise it. I have the great privilege of being able to work with my daughter, who did her PhD in kinesiology, focusing on the development of character. And I credit her with bringing exercise science study into understanding how you actually develop character. And in this case, we use this kind of phrase, who am I becoming while I'm busy doing? So we're always going to become something. Often we could be atrophying our character, becoming less humble, less courageous, having less drive. And with the conscious attention to understand what character is and having an exercise program, we talk about it as going to character gym. You can begin to think about how are you going to exercise your character every day. And that's how you're going to build and strengthen character.
It's interesting. One of the things you had me thinking as you were talking about that is one of the reasons I left corporate life and started my own company was I felt, I don't know, I felt like I wasn't authentic to who I wanted to be as a person. I felt like I was compromising my character to be able to fulfill the things they wanted me to do, especially around how we treated people. And I had a real conflict with that and had a real problem with it. And so eventually I went out on my own, started my own business where I could sort of make my own rules. Can a business or an organizational its culture, can it really affect the development of character or the influence of character on individuals?
It's such a great question. So I spent a lot of time in organizations around this. Think about how much organizations spend on trying to transform or build their culture. And the simple matter that we talk about is culture will be a reflection of the character of the people within it, particularly its senior leadership. So if we've hardwired some dimensions of character as overweighted and others as underweighted, our culture is going to have this kind of quality of also being manifesting in this overweighting and underweighting. We actually have a chart that we talk about how can you diagnose the culture of the organization from a character standpoint. But then, you course correct it. When we're working with senior leaders, they start to get this. And by the way, nobody describes themselves, particularly senior leaders, having character as being underweighted or overweighted. That's not how we do it. And I myself would be the same way. It's like you take a look at the set of behaviors that are virtuous and you say, well, yeah, that's what I aspire to be. That's what I want to be. What they quickly get is there's a gap between our intention and our observable behavior. And that is compounded by the fact that research shows that 85% of us believe we're self-aware and only 10% are. So this ability then to think about your character and have a way of understanding what your character is to think about, is it in the excess or deficiency? I'll give you my own example, which I use quite often because it's quite apparent to me. I think about the virtuous state of character is like being on a balance beam. It's not great. You have to exercise to actually stay on the balance beam. There's a lean to the left, maybe, which your deficient side, a lean to the right, your excess side. And you have to figure out what your lean is. Under judgment, there's a behavior called decisiveness. And in my case, I do not have a lean to indecision. I am like a very, very decisive person. So that tells me that my lean is probably to the excess side. And the excess side, the excess vice is impulsive. I never describe myself as impulsive, but what I have to recognize then is when I'm working with others and I make that quick decision, how is it they know it's good judgment? Or how is it that they actually see it as decisiveness in its virtuous state versus me being impulsive? So let's go back to what we talked about earlier. It's only if my humanity, humility, collaboration, those aspects that can be seen as strong. And if I look at things like my collaboration, my open-mindedness to others, my flexibility in my thinking, if they can see that and observe that muscle working, then they can trust that my decisiveness is actually not impulsive. It's just a perspective that I'm bringing at that point in time. And the manifestation, I know we talked about this before the listeners came on, a world with better bosses. Imagine what happens where I feel that my decisiveness is the beginning of the conversation, but others see it as the end of the conversation. And imagine what we can do if we can just course correct around some of these atomic particles that we haven't quite got right. So now we go back and we go, all right, we can start to course correct with our senior leadership on the virtues and vices. But you know what? We've hardwired it also into things like selection, what we reward, so all of your HR practices. So what we do say is once you start working on character development, you start examining the hardwiring of the organization to say, do we need some course correction there too? But it really starts with us. I love that old cartoon. We have met the enemy, and it is us,
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things you just mentioned that sort of sits in the back of my mind as it comes to, leader, just all the work that I've done in leadership is this idea that you said somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% of people are actually self-aware, and you said, what was the other statistic? That was a higher percentage think they're self-aware or something to that effect, right?
85% believe they are. So, people get that. As soon as I say that, they're going like, oh, right. And the intention behavior gap, people get it. We go, wow. That tells us we've got a blind spot that has to be, addressed. And that opens us up to learning about what? Self-aware about what? Well, we can become self-aware about our character.
When you work with companies and you start working on this character development, do you see that the fact that people have a higher perception of their self-awareness as a barrier to being open to the idea of character development? Do you have to fight through that, I guess, is what I'm wondering.
It's pretty rare that you do. And I'll tell you why is that character matters to us personally and professionally. So, I was working with a capital markets group of a bank, and we finished a session, just an introductory session. And the response we got is not pushback of, what is this, blah, blah, blah. It's actually somebody saying, where can I get help on this with my 13-year-old son? And which my response was, well, that would be you. And, think about our role as parents is fundamentally to develop the character of our kids, more so than competence. But many people are saying, I don't have a roadmap. I don't know what this is. I don't understand the way that I can actually work with, whether it's your kid or it's a colleague or a subordinate or it's a superior. If we understand this, it's like we become physiotherapists in understanding the anatomy and physiology of the body. It becomes very, very practical to help us know this is where we can introduce an exercise or something that's going to get us back to health in terms of how we want to, bring our best self to the situation.
One of the things that I see in what you've discussed and what I've seen is that is that this area of character, as you said before, was sort of like it's fuzzy. It's hard to get a grasp on. But what I can appreciate is you've developed something that's more concrete. You can see it, you can feel it. It makes sense. I think of the color wheel and the opposites and how that makes sense to me. And this sort of wheel makes sense in terms of the balance between the one character and the other character, with judgment being at the center. Now, how do we take that that base core knowledge, and as you mentioned, how do we roll that into the aspects of the business? Like you said, we want to roll this into things like recruitment, advancement, training, promotion. How does that how does that roll in, or what companies are rolling that in well, or what have you seen some successes and the best practices on kind of putting this in your organization?
Mhm. Yeah, so we try to bring that roadmap map in the character compass book, and we really talk about start with awareness. So we do a lot of awareness workshops in organizations. Like I talked about that capital markets group, they tend to be, kind of like 2 to 4 hour workshops where you're introducing people to understanding character and its benefits. I mean, which we haven't even talked about. Things like a 14% increase in leader effectiveness, going from weak to strong character, an 18% improvement in psychological safety in an organization. Think about, we know that research tells us a ton about, getting, in our case, an 18% increase in employee voice. So we do in those workshops expose people to what character is, how to develop it. And a key part of that is we had worked with an assessment company, Sigma Assessment Systems, to develop the leader character insight assessment, both self and 360 assessment. So you bring a concrete, practical way that people can, usually we start with self-assessing character, and they can begin to understand it themselves. So awareness is the first step. Development, critical. I don't think you can get into any area of things like selection, promotion. If you don't understand what character is, you're not working on developing it yourself. It's very hard. It's much harder to observe it. It's much harder to observe it in others. And the more you're working on the development side, the better you're able to just naturally get into selection, which I'll talk about in a moment. So on the development side, we became really concrete again and developed an app called Virtuosity, which puts in the palm of the individual exercises customized to what their needs are for every day. We call it going to the character gym, for what they need to do and exercise every single day. So let's say we cross that hurdle, then we've got awareness, we've got development going on in place. Now we think about, how do we start to amend organizational practices? Selection, there are organizations like Canada Revenue Agency. They're about a 50,000 person organization, and they are hiring at the executive level with character alongside competence. And so we've written an article about this. Somebody can look it up, Canada Revenue Agency, and looking at character-based selection, where we essentially call it character-based conversation. You and I were chatting just before we got on a little bit about, I'd spent time in your area, and I work with some NHL teams, professional sports teams, helping them identify players prior to the draft who have strength of character, not just competence. So the identification, I think, in selection and promotion of character is a really, really great place to embed it. And then we've also talked about culture. You can really weave character into culture. So those are a few places.
I absolutely love this. And, it's funny because I've always thought that, I can teach, in a lot of cases, and I have experience with this, I can teach the fundamentals of the business. I can teach you how to run the business or how to operate inside the business. But your character is something that I really need in my organization. So I do look for character when I'm looking for individuals. And in my case, I always tend to, because I'm a, startup company, I always look for grit, tenacity, someone who's willing to, that doesn't give up easily, and sort of has a history of persevering under pressure. I want that type of character in the people I select, because I know what we're doing is difficult. And I can teach you the basics of my business. It's not that hard. And I found as I've done that, I've had I've had better employees. I've had employees that have served longer and have done more for the company, as I've not just looked for the person that has that engineering skill that I need for that particular job, but I look for that character. So I really see the benefit of using character assessments to be able to find the right employees. But I guess to this point, I've always done it sort of, I haven't done it with a model, right? It's been done just through gut feel and in my questions to try to assess their character and their history and how they develop their character.
And then think about the opportunity for development. Again, using a sports analogy, can you imagine any professional sports team today not having a gym where people exercise?
Right.
That on character, that's what we've done.
Yeah.
And think about the performance and well-being. By the way, character is about both performance and well-being that you are developing. If you started to exercise character, it's just this root system of the tree that's just been languishing. It's just been there. We've got it wrong. We've got imbalances and different things. We haven't even exercised it. Like, to me, it's just the most promising area that has been neglected, and for organization creates incredible competitive advantage for those that undertake it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is, again, underappreciated. It's been understudied. It's a big gap, and I'm really, really excited about the work that you guys have done, because I think it's much needed, and we really need it both from an academic standpoint and also from a practical standpoint as well. I can see the benefits in both. Um, so, what final message would you like to leave with our listeners right now?
Well, it's, for me, it's all very practical, and there's some sort of nothing more practical than great theory. I often say the world's on fire and we need more firefighters. And it's not technical, it is character. We need strength of character. So I hope that this inspires some people to say, there's a lot that we never understood about character. It probably is starting to get some people going, maybe that's what I'm dealing with. Then leaving with them with the idea that there are practical tools. Like, this is stuff we can do. We know what the character gym is. We know, we wrote in the character compass how it is that you can apply it in organizations. So I do hope that it really motivates people to delve in a little bit deeper into what character might offer to them.
Absolutely. I know for me, it's exciting because as an engineer, I train technically, right? I've had a hard time putting into words what character is, and what I love about what you guys have done is that you can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it, you can understand and explain it to others. And I need that as a a technical mind, right? So I see the practicalities of that, being able to teach it to my employees and my team. So I think it's fantastic. So how can our listeners find out more about you and this new book?
Okay, well, the book itself is called The Character Compass, so that one is usually fairly easy to find. A few other places where there's great resources, I would say the Ivey Business School. So this is ivy.uwo.ca/leadership. Lots of great resources there. We have a Question of Character podcast series. So, and John, you'll like it. We talked about engineering, for example, and bringing character into formula racing was this podcast that we did about that. We talked about professional sports and culture and all sorts of things. We started a consulting firm, leadercharacterassociates.com, and that's really to help organizations bring that strategic impact to it. Virtuositycharacter.ca is a place where you can find out about the app itself. And then I'm not a social media person, but my daughter twisted my arm and said, you have to start on LinkedIn to share your writing and your work. So I am now on LinkedIn, John, so people can find me there.
Fantastic. And we're going to go ahead and put links to all those resources here in the show notes. So right here below in the notes, you're going to find the links for all of Mary's resources. And again, leaders, I hope that, like you, your eyes are open through this discussion. You see character as not some sort of murky, it's out there, it's important, but I don't understand it kind of thing, to something that's more clear, that's been heavily researched, that has been documented. And again, Mary pointed out, you're going to get higher performance. You're going to get better performance from your employees if you've developed the character in your leaders. You build that character in your culture. You want a place where people love to come to work. They love what they do, and they like working for you part of that, a big part of that is character and character development. So I highly encourage you to check out the book, The Character Compass, and check out the resources in the links that we have below here. Mary, I want to thank you for coming on the show. You have opened my eyes to this, and I really, my hat's off to the work that you have done. It's super important in helping us build a world with better bosses. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thanks, John. It's great having me on your show and talking to your listeners.
I loved it. I love it. Thanks again. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.